There are some voices that seem to come not from a person, but from a higher place. A sound so pure, so powerful, and so full of emotion that it bypasses the ears and goes straight to the soul. For a generation, that voice belonged to one woman. When she sang, the world simply stopped to listen. It could be a whisper of heartbreak in one moment and a soaring testament to joy in the next. It was perfect. And perhaps that was the problem. The woman behind that voice was Whitney Houston. But the world simply called her the Voice. She was America's sweetheart, a pop princess with gospel fire in her chest, a woman of seemingly effortless beauty, grace, and vocal power. Her music became the backdrop to our most personal moments: proms, weddings, breakups, quiet late-night drives. But while the public marveled at the perfection, Whitney was carrying something else entirely. Behind the precision and polish was a lifetime of pressure, of pain, and of trying to live up to a standard no one could survive. To understand Whitney Houston, you have to understand the world she was built to conquer. The 1980s weren't just the rise of a pop star. They were the invention of a new kind of American icon. The rise of MTV had transformed music from a purely auditory experience into a visual one. Image was now everything. This was the era of the global megapop icon, a pantheon dominated by figures like Michael Jackson, Madonna, and Prince. They weren't just singers, they were visual brands, their every move choreographed for a global television audience. For Black artists, however, the landscape was more complicated. While funk, soul, and R&B were staples of the radio, breaking into the top tier of pop stardom and getting into heavy rotation on the newly powerful MTV was a formidable challenge. The music industry was obsessed with the concept of crossover, an artist who could appeal to both black and white audiences, who could top both the R&B and the pop charts. It was a delicate, often fraught balancing act. Many in the industry were looking for the next Diana Ross, a black artist with undeniable talent, but also a polished, non-threatening image that could be marketed to mainstream white America. They were looking for a pop queen, and in a church choir in Newark, New Jersey, a young girl with a staggering vocal gift was waiting in the wings. Whitney Elizabeth Houston, born on August 9, 1963, was not just born to sing, she was born into a musical dynasty. Her mother was Cissy Houston, a Grammy-winning gospel and soul singer who had provided backing vocals for everyone from Elvis Presley to Aretha Franklin. Her cousins were the celebrated singers Dionne and Dee Dee Warwick, and her honorary aunt, the woman she called Auntie Ree, was none other than the Queen of Soul herself, Aretha Franklin. Music was not just a career in the Houston family. It was a calling, a language, and a sacred duty. Whitney's childhood was spent in the pews of the New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, watching her mother command the choir with a voice that could shake the rafters. It was here, in the crucible of gospel music, that her own incredible instrument was forged. Cissy was a loving but demanding teacher. She was a perfectionist who understood the power and the discipline required to be a great singer. She drilled Whitney relentlessly, teaching her phrasing, control, and how to channel emotion through her voice. By the time she was a teenager, Whitney was already a seasoned performer, singing solos in church and providing backing vocals for her mother's nightclub act, and later for artists like Chaka Khan and Lou Rawls. She was stunningly beautiful, with a natural grace and a warm, girl-next-door charm. She began modeling in the early 1980s, becoming one of the first African-American women to appear on the cover of 17 magazine. But it was her voice that was destined to be her future. Record executives were circling, but Cissy was fiercely protective, turning down several early offers. She was waiting for the right person, someone who wouldn't just sign her daughter, but who would understand her potential and groom her for greatness. In 1983, that person arrived. He was Clive Davis, the legendary head of Arista Records, a brilliant music executive with a reputation for discovering and meticulously developing superstars like Barry Manilow and Patti Smith. The story of their first meeting is now the stuff of music industry legend. Davis saw Whitney performing with her mother at a nightclub in New York City. He was, by his own account, utterly stunned. He knew in that moment that he had found not just a star, but a once-in-a-generation talent. He signed her to a worldwide record deal immediately. But Clive Davis's vision for Whitney was incredibly specific. He didn't want to sign a gospel singer or an R&B diva. He wanted to create a global pop superstar. For the next 2 years, he and Whitney worked tirelessly, carefully selecting the perfect songs, producers, and songwriters for her debut album. The goal was clear: to create an album that would appeal to the widest possible audience. The sound was polished, the production was pop-oriented, and the image was pristine. Whitney was presented to the world as America's sweetheart, a beautiful, elegant, and wholesome girl with a voice that could move mountains. In 1985, her debut album, Whitney Houston, was released. It started slow, but then the second single, a powerful ballad called You Give Good Love, began to climb the charts. The third single, Saving All My Love for You, went to number 1. And then came the deluge. The upbeat, infectious How Will I Know and Greatest Love of All also hit number 1. The album went on to sell over 25 million copies worldwide, becoming the best-selling debut album by a female artist in history. Whitney Houston, at the age of 22, was a global superstar. Her second album, Whitney, released in 1987, was an even bigger phenomenon. It debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 chart, the first album by a female artist to ever do so. It produced 4 more number 1 singles: I Wanna Dance with Somebody Who Loves Me, Didn't We Almost Have It All, So Emotional, and Where Do Broken Hearts Go? This gave her a staggering, record-shattering total of 7 consecutive number 1 hits, breaking a record previously held by the Beatles and the Bee Gees. She was, at this point, the most successful and celebrated female artist on the planet. But the pressure of being perfect Whitney Houston was immense. The image that Clive Davis had so carefully crafted was that of a non-threatening, almost angelic pop princess. She was marketed to be, as one critic put it, not too black, not too white. This strategy was incredibly successful commercially, but it came at a personal cost. At the 1989 Soul Train Music Awards, an event celebrating black music, Whitney's name was announced as a nominee, and a smattering of boos could be heard from the audience. The incident reportedly devastated her. She was being accused of selling out, of abandoning her R&B and gospel roots in favor of making polished pop music for a white audience. It was a painful moment that highlighted the impossible tightrope she was forced to walk. She was trying to be everything to everyone, and in the process, she was beginning to feel like she wasn't being true to herself. It was around this time that one of the most significant and, for decades, most hidden aspects of her inner life became a source of intense conflict. Since she was a teenager, Whitney's closest confidant, her protector, and her constant companion was a woman named Robin Crawford. They met as counselors at a summer camp in East Orange, New Jersey, when Whitney was just 16. Their bond was immediate and intense. Robin became Whitney's executive assistant, her creative partner, and the one person she trusted implicitly. For years, rumors circulated about the nature of their relationship. The press hinted at it, but it was a taboo subject. In her 2019 memoir, A Song for You, My Life with Whitney Houston, Robin Crawford confirmed what many had long suspected. Their relationship had been a romantic one in its early years. She wrote that Whitney ended the physical aspect of their relationship shortly after she signed her record deal with Clive Davis, telling her that if the public found out, it would be used against them. Whitney, who came from a deeply religious Baptist background, believed a relationship between two women was something the world, and particularly her family, would never accept. This was the central secret conflict of Whitney Houston's life. She was being presented to the world as the perfect all-American girl while having to hide a fundamental part of her own identity. The pressure from her family, her church, and her record label to conform to a conventional heterosexual image was immense. Robin remained her closest friend, her sister, but the need to keep their true bond a secret created a deep well of private pain and turmoil that would haunt Whitney for the rest of her life. As the 1990s began, Whitney sought to take more control of her music and her image. She wanted to infuse her work with more of the urban R&B flavor she had been criticized for abandoning. Her 1990 album, I'm Your Baby Tonight, did just that. But it was her performance at Super Bowl 25 in 1991 that cemented her status as a national treasure. On the eve of the Gulf War, with the nation on edge, she walked onto the field and delivered a rendition of The Star-Spangled Banner so powerful, so full of grace and soaring emotion, that it brought the country to a standstill. Her version was released as a single and became a massive hit. It was a unifying moment, and Whitney Houston was its voice. A year later, she would reach the absolute zenith of her career, becoming not just the biggest singer in the world, but the biggest movie star as well. She co-starred with Kevin Costner in the 1992 romantic thriller, The Bodyguard. The film was a global blockbuster, but it was the soundtrack that made history, and specifically one song. It was a cover of a Dolly Parton country ballad, which Whitney transformed into a towering epic testament to love and loss. That song was I Will Always Love You. The recording is a masterclass in vocal performance. It begins with a vulnerable a cappella whisper and builds note by perfect note into one of the most powerful and recognizable crescendos in the history of popular music. The song spent a record-breaking 14 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. It became Whitney's signature song and the best-selling single by a female artist of all time. At that moment, Whitney Houston was on top of the world. She was untouchable, a global icon of talent, beauty, and success. It was also at this peak of her fame that she made a life-altering personal decision. In 1992, she married the R&B singer Bobby Brown. To the public, it was a puzzling match. Whitney was America's sweetheart. Bobby was the bad boy of R&B, with a reputation for a volatile temper and a growing number of run-ins with the law. The tabloid narrative that quickly formed was a simple one. The bad boy corrupted the good girl, but the reality, as is so often the case, was far more complex. Whitney was drawn to Bobby's energy, his street-smart authenticity, and the fact that he seemed to see her not as Whitney the icon, but as a real person. With him, she felt she could finally let her guard down, to be the Nippy from Newark that her family knew, not the perfect pop star the world demanded. Their relationship was passionate and loving, but also deeply volatile and tumultuous. Both were struggling with the immense pressures of fame, and together they descended into a well-publicized cycle of substance abuse. The simple story is that Bobby introduced Whitney to hard drugs. The more nuanced truth, as confirmed by her own family and friends, is that Whitney's struggles with drugs had begun long before she met him, but their marriage amplified their shared demons. The perfect image began to crack. Throughout the late 1990s, stories of her erratic behavior, canceled concerts, and dramatic weight loss became staples of the tabloid press. The voice, once so reliable and pure, began to show signs of strain. The new millennium brought her struggles into painfully sharp focus. In 2002, she sat down for a now infamous interview with Diane Sawyer. Gaunt, jittery, and defiant, she tried to combat the rumors swirling around her. When Sawyer pressed her about her reported use of crack cocaine, Whitney delivered the line that would become a tragic meme. Let's get one thing straight. Crack is cheap. I make too much money to ever smoke crack. Let's get that straight, okay? Crack is whack. It was a moment of desperate, on-camera denial, a painful glimpse of a woman trying and failing to control a narrative that had completely spiraled out of her grasp. The years that followed were a heartbreaking public decline. Her marriage to Bobby Brown disintegrated on the reality television show Being Bobby Brown, which exposed their chaotic home life to the world. They divorced in 2007. There were several attempts at a comeback, but the damage to her legendary voice was becoming irreversible. The years of smoking and drug use had ravaged her vocal cords. The once effortless power was gone, replaced by a raspy, strained shadow of its former glory. During her final world tour in 2010, she was often unable to hit the high notes, leading to poor reviews and disappointed fans leaving her concerts early. The loss of her voice, the very gift that had defined her entire existence, was the ultimate tragedy. On the afternoon of February 11, 2012, Whitney Houston was in her suite at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Los Angeles. She was in town for the annual pre-Grammy Gala, the legendary party hosted by her mentor, Clive Davis. It was the very event that had launched her career into the stratosphere nearly 3 decades earlier. But she would never make it to the party. She was found unresponsive, submerged in the bathtub. Paramedics were unable to revive her. Whitney Houston was pronounced dead at the age of 48. The official cause of death was drowning, attributed to the effects of atherosclerotic heart disease and cocaine use. The impact of Whitney Houston's life and career is immeasurable. She didn't just sing songs, she changed the way people sing. She set a new standard for vocal power, technical precision, and emotional delivery in pop music. His wife, Belle, was his rock. She loved him deeply, and she did everything she could to help him. She tried to get him to seek treatment, to talk about the things that were torturing him. But Kermit, a man of his time, a man raised to believe that one must always be strong and silent in the face of suffering, could not or would not open up. The bottle became his only confidant. There is a heartbreaking, little-known detail from this period of his life. His father, Theodore, had died in 1919, not long after Kermit's return from the war. Kermit had been his father's literary executor, and he had thrown himself into the work of editing his father's letters and papers. It was as if, by immersing himself in his father's words, he could somehow keep the great man alive, could continue to feel his presence and his approval. But it also meant that he was constantly living with the ghost of a man he could never hope to emulate. The contrast between the vibrant, heroic image of his public life and the quiet desperation of his private struggle was stark. When the world once again plunged into war in 1939, Kermit, now 50 years old, once again felt the call to serve. His body was older and his spirit was wounded, but the Roosevelt blood ran thick in his veins. Just as he had done in the previous war, Kermit bypassed America's neutrality by once again enlisting in the British forces, using his connections, which included his friend Winston Churchill, to secure a commission. He served with distinction in the ill-fated Norway campaign, fighting against the Nazi invasion. He was wounded in the Battle of Narvik. He then served in Egypt. But his alcoholism was now a severe and debilitating problem. He was often ill, and his commanding officers, while respecting his bravery, knew that he was a liability. In 1941, he was given a medical discharge and sent home. It was a crushing blow to his pride. He returned to America a broken man. His drinking spiraled out of control. His family was desperate. His brother Archie and his wife Belle, in a last-ditch effort to save him, made a painful decision. They lobbied their cousin, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, to give Kermit a commission in the U.S. Army. They hoped that the structure and discipline of military life, the sense of purpose, might be the one thing that could pull him back from the abyss. Franklin, who was fond of his cousin, agreed. He knew the risks, but he also knew the family's history of service. In 1942, Kermit Roosevelt was commissioned as a major in the United States Army and posted to Fort Richardson in the remote, desolate landscape of Alaska. His job was to work as an intelligence officer and to help establish a militia of local Alaskan natives to defend against a potential Japanese invasion of the Aleutian Islands. It was a lonely, isolated post, and for a man battling the demons of depression and alcoholism, it was the worst possible place to be. The long, dark Alaskan winters mirrored the darkness in his own soul. He was far from his family, far from anyone who understood the depth of his pain. His health continued to deteriorate. On the night of June 4th, 1943, in his small Spartan room at Fort Richardson, Kermit Roosevelt, the man who had faced down lions in Africa and machine guns in Mesopotamia, the man who had pulled his father from the jaws of death in the Amazon, finally lost his own war. He took his own life with a single gunshot to the head. He was 53 years old. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, a common euphemism at the time to spare the family the shame and stigma of suicide. But the truth was known to those closest to him. It was a tragedy that was kept quiet, a painful secret buried under the weight of a famous name and the turmoil of a world at war. Kermit Roosevelt was buried in the Fort Richardson National Cemetery, far from his family's home in Oyster Bay. His grave is a simple, unassuming marker, one among thousands of others who gave their lives in service to their country. There is no mention of the Amazon, no mention of the military cross, no hint of the extraordinary life he lived. So, what is the legacy of this forgotten Roosevelt? What can we learn from his tragic story? In many ways, Kermit's life is a cautionary tale about the crushing weight of expectation and the silent, deadly nature of depression. He lived in an era when men, especially men like him, were expected to be stoic, to bear their burdens without complaint. There was no language, no understanding for the kind of psychological wounds he carried. He was a hero in every sense of the word, but he was also a man in desperate need of a kind of help that simply wasn't available to him. His story humanizes a family that has often been mythologized, that has been cast as a dynasty of unbreakable strength. Her influence is a direct line that runs through virtually every major female vocalist who came after her, from Mariah Carey and Celine Dion to Beyoncé, Christina Aguilera, and Adele. She redefined what it meant to be a pop diva. Her significance also lies in her role as a cultural trailblazer. In the 1980s, she smashed through racial barriers on MTV, becoming one of the first black female artists to achieve superstar status on the platform. With The Bodyguard, she proved that a black woman could be a leading lady in Hollywood and a global box office draw. She opened doors for generations of artists to come, but her life also became a tragic, cautionary tale about the crushing pressures of modern celebrity, the relentless media scrutiny, the complete loss of privacy, and the struggle with addiction played out on a public stage, turning her personal pain into a spectacle for public consumption. In the end, the story of Whitney Houston is a story about a voice, not just the magnificent singing voice that the world fell in love with, but the quiet inner voice of a woman who was never truly allowed to be heard. She was the church girl from Newark who became a global pop queen, the perfect princess who longed to be a real person, the faithful Christian who was forced to hide the love she shared with her closest friend. She was asked to be an icon, a symbol, a brand, and for a long time she played the part perfectly. But the cost of silencing her true self was, in the end, too much to bear. We remember her for the soaring notes, the effortless runs, and the moments of pure, transcendent musical joy she gave the world. But perhaps the most honest way to honor her legacy is to also remember the struggle behind the smile, the vulnerability behind the power, and the complex, beautiful, and ultimately tragic human being behind the voice. She gave us everything she had, and it cost her everything in return. We're done for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful, smash the like button, comment below, and hit subscribe for more great content coming your way soon.